YouTube's just taking a little long. All right, now you're live on YouTube.
All right, great. Good evening, everyone. I am Lynn Bruneau, the chairman of the Orleans Finance Committee, and I call to order the Town of Orleans Finance Committee meeting on Thursday, the 29th of April, 2021. And we have a joint meeting tonight with the Board of Water and Sewer Commissioners. I will get everybody introduced on the screens. We have guests as well from AECom and from Ty and Bond, and the DPW Director Tom Daly is here as well. So I will use my screen for the introductions. It may not look the same for you. We are streaming live on YouTube tonight rather than channel 18, which is busy with other events. So getting everybody introduced, maybe raise hands to just say that you can hear me for our meeting tonight. So top row, as I see it, John Meyer, member of the Board of Water and Sewer Commissioners, then my photo. Then Nick Athanasio, a member of the Finance Committee, then Len Short, member of the Board of Water and Sewer Commissioners, Bob Rich, also Water and Sewer Commissioners. The next row on my screen is Alan McLennan, Vice Chair of Water and Sewer Commissioners. Below me on my screen is Roger Pearson, member of the Finance Committee, then Ian Catlow, the OPM for the town and from Ty and Bond, then Mark Burson, a member of the Board of Water and Sewer Commissioners, then the side of Herb Kinney's head, he's a member of the Board of Water and Sewer Commissioners. The next row down on my screen is Dick Hartman, the chair of the Board of Water and Sewer Commissioners, then Bob Wren, a member of the Finance Committee, then Tom Parise from AECom, welcome. Then Tim Coonahan, a member of the Finance Committee, Amy Hunter from AECom, welcome Amy. Let's see, bottom row, dark screen, Reggie Donahue from AECom, and then Tom Daly, director of the DPW, and Tess Laffler with a photograph, another member from AECom. I think I got everybody. We do not have tonight Kevin Galligan, chair of the Select Board. He is at other meetings this evening and will not be with us. And maybe so we don't forget about it, Mr. Hartman, would you like to call your meeting to order before we do protocols and things?
Certainly. Thank you for having us, Lynn and Finance Committee. I, Department Chair, Orleans Board of Water Sewer Commissioners, call the meeting to order at 6 something on what time we got?
April 29th.
6:05 on April 29th.
Great. All right, just a few meeting protocol types of things. There's so many of us tonight. Remember, if you'd like to comment or ask a question, please wait to be recognized by the chair. However, when we're doing screen share, that's not usually possible because often the chair can't see you. So just shout out if you have a question. Also, be sure to speak clearly so that you're understood by our audience. And for the videotape, be sure to mute your microphone when you're not speaking. And later, for any votes taken by either committee at this meeting, it's a remote meeting, so we need to take roll call votes. Before we get started, is there anyone here for public comment who would like to speak on any topic other than the Board of Water and Sewer Commissioners update, the sewer update tonight? Sarah, can you help us see if there's anyone here for public comment?
Yeah, there's nobody here for public comment.
Thanks for your help with that.
You're welcome.
Just a couple of announcements that we have begun to do to help our audience. Remember that your quarterly property tax payment is due on Monday, on or before Monday. They were mailed in January. Information was included for this fourth quarter installment bill. If you misplaced or didn't get your January bill, you can get a copy online on the town website or call the tax collector's office. You can pay online through the town website or drop your payment off at the drop box at Town Hall. Separate topic altogether. Also, beginning May 1st through the end of September, you'll be getting in your next water bill an announcement. The water department is requesting that all non-essential outdoor water use be limited to no more than 2 days a week and only before 9 a.m. or after 5 p.m. Please do not water lawns, gardens, or shrubs. Do not wash your car, do not fill swimming pools, do not run your washing machine between the hours of 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. Scheduling those activities for off-peak hours will help the town to supply all the water needed for our residents and our visitors during the summer months. And again, as noted, specific notices about this will be in your next water bill. Also on Monday the 3rd from 5 to 6:30 p.m., the Orleans Citizens Forum is sponsoring a session on enterprise funds, on the new enterprise funds, providing helpful insight in the run-up to town meeting, talking about the 5 specific articles for the enterprise funds, one for each of the new of those. Speakers include John Kelly, the town administrator, Kevin Galligan, the select board chairman, and I will be representing the finance committee. Alan, I'm not sure if Kathy Doan is also, he's giving us a heads up saying Kathy Doan will also be speaking then as well. It will be a Zoom webinar and a Channel 18 broadcast. There will be a Q&A session, so your questions can be submitted through the OCF ahead of time to that website and perhaps real time as well. Also, separate topic, COVID update. The vaccine clinics continue weekly at the college. You can pre-register through the mass.gov website. And now anyone over age 16 is eligible. I don't believe there is yet a new clinic sponsored in Orleans that's been announced yet. Separately, in case we forget about it later when we're talking about sewer updates, in our meetings this morning, as I understood it, the work is almost done on the state highways, 6A and 28 by the end of next week. Give me a nod of the head from somebody. I believe I understood that this morning. And they will be continuing to work over the summer on the side roads, but they'll be off the main drags hopefully by the end of next week. Separate topic altogether, the town's annual report, the glossy covered one that often you pick up at town meeting, but you can get it ahead of time. It's available on the table in front of town hall. And also the warrant for town meeting is available in front of town hall. Both of those are available. Also, one more thing, town election information, the vote by mail is available. They were going to be mailing the ballots today, I believe, for those who had previously signed up to get those ballots, but you can still sign up to vote by mail. There's a sample ballot online that shows the people who were up for election, as well as the 5 debt exclusion articles. And voter registrations are available outside town hall on the table or also online. I'm done with those. Any other things to announce that I forgot of critical importance or any important? All right, let's move ahead. Joint meeting with the Board of Water and Sewer Commissioners, DPW Director Tom Daly, and representatives from AECom and Ty and Bond for updates on the sewer project and the town meeting, Meeting House Pond planning and design and other adaptive management initiatives. So perhaps turn things over, microphone over to Dick Hartman to introduce the rest of this agenda item, this particular item. Dick.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Lynn. I forgot, Ian, you were going to go first or Tom? I forgot we discussed this afternoon.
Ian, I think.
Yeah, I'm going first, okay. And then.
All right. So Ian's going to kick off. You'll see that we have a bit of redundancy. We've been through this before. Some of it is updates of some of the technical things that we have been that you have seen in a couple of updates we have had at other places. So some of it we will go over a little bit quickly in the interest of time. There, Tom Parise's presentation alone is quite detailed in 36 pages of such. So if we do assume that we have an understanding and we don't, please stop us. But with that, I think you find this is the most thorough presentation. Obviously, we have the most going on. The project overall, the project is going very, very well. There's some things we're on the lookout for. We'll discuss those today. But we know we're at a great pace. We're very happy with both the contractors. And with that, I'll just let Ian start and Tom can follow.
Okay, can everybody hear me by a show of a thumbs up or a nod? Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Okay, and you should see a screen with a slideshow on it.
Got it.
Okay, perfect. Like Dick said, I'm going to focus on talking about the collection system project and then treatment facility project. And then I'll probably drop off and the focus will shift to Tom's work or AECOM's work on Meeting House Pond and other planning type activities that are ongoing. So with that, let's get started.
Ian,
this is going to look.
Ian, in
Yes.
the picture, would you orient the geography for us in this photo?
Sure. Okay, so this is the access drive to the plant. Route 6A is just off the frame here to the left. Come up the drive. This is going to be the main treatment plant building in the center of the frame. You can see the foundation there. And this is the equipment storage facility off to the left. There's more pictures as we move through it, so we'll try to provide similar orientation.
Thank you.
Just in terms of overview, we'll talk really briefly about construction progress for both the collection system and the treatment facility. I'll hit on schedule really quickly. We'll talk about construction costs and some change orders we've incurred to date. And in that discussion will be a little bit of time spent on cost control measures. And then I'll close out with a slide on contract operations procurement, which is now ongoing. So in terms of construction project update or progress update, the high level view is both projects are currently on schedule. When we talk to both of our contractors, they believe they're going to hit their end date per the contract or perhaps a little bit better. Material testing and quality control that's being performed on both projects has been favorable thus far. So we're really pleased with that, keeping a close eye on things as they move forward. There's been limited change orders, and some of those have addressed cost savings opportunities, and some have addressed design changes. And of course, one more update, I guess, to kind of add to the list that Lynn presented at the outset of the meeting. If you want to learn anything about the project or why it's taken you longer to get to Friends Market or somewhere else in town, check out the town website. AECOM, particularly Amy, has been doing a fantastic job keeping that updated with traffic information and where work is ongoing. So briefly, in terms of collection system progress, mainline sewer installation is complete on Old Tote, West Road, Eldridge Park. It's a fair amount of work that's done on 6A at this point, Lots Hollow and Brewster Cross Road. In fact, Brewster Cross Road is the deepest sewer on the project. It's just about 26 feet below grade. So making good progress on some of the harder parts of the collection system project. Nearly all the materials and equipment are approved at this point and in production, and things are going really smoothly there. Flipping over to the wastewater treatment facility site, the gentlemen in the figure here are wrapping up some floor finishing work in the lower level of the treatment facility. You can kind of get a sense by looking at these guys and the height of the walls and the columns that are set in place in the photo, just how big the facility is. It's coming along quite well at this point. The base slab is complete. All the foundation walls and columns are in progress. And in the next few weeks, Danny O'Connell and Sons is going to be preparing elevated slab portions of the concrete work, which would be kind of you could imagine a ceiling over these gentlemen that are working in the lower level. There's a substantial amount of contractor proposed equipment that's under review through the shop drawing process. While many materials have been approved and are being manufactured, AECOM and DOC are working hard to kind of keep feeding the construction machine, if you will, by getting additional shop drawings reviewed and approved so that they can get things on order. We're trying to keep a close eye on this particular issue, just as we're all concerned about, potential delays in shipping and procurement of certain items. This is a photo of the equipment storage facility from the other day. For those who looked at the Board of Selectmen update that I gave, I want to say that was back on March 10th. At that point in time, we were really just looking at a foundation that had just been finished there. Now the floor has been poured, the wall slabs are, the brickwork for the walls is now going up at a pretty good clip. And you can see the masons working in the photo here. They'll probably be done, maybe by the beginning of next week, and be looking to start taking on the roof and other things for this facility. I got two photos of the site, and I wanted to share these because one of them was from the Board of Selectmen presentation that I gave on the 10th, a little over a month ago. Okay, and here you can see what I was just trying to explain. For orientation, the equipment storage facility is in the upper right of the photo, and obviously the main plant is in the center. And you can see they're still pouring base slabs in the basement of the building at that time. Daniel Connells was out yesterday. They brought their drone and did another flight of the site, and this is what's happened in just over a month and a half. You can see the extent of walls that have gone up around the basement. There's some formwork here that they need to finish up stripping. Obviously, there's still some wall sections that need to go in, but they're moving right along. This is great progress. Moving off of the treatment plant site to the Wick well, this is the disposal location up near the water tower. The valve vault is essentially in place in terms of its base and walls. There's some piping going in and out of the vault at this point, and the photo that you're looking at here shows that the contractor has formed up so that he can pour concrete for the roof of this structure. This is kind of something that isn't really on the critical path, but they've taken it on opportunistically so that when they have a spare moment, they can come up and pour this concrete. Okay, so now the interesting stuff for FinCom, right? This is the cost update. So 2 contracts. We initially started the wastewater treatment facility out at $32,786,000. The cost has increased to $33,713,889. We've talked previously in other Board of Selectmen updates about why that's gone up. Some of it, a lot of it, has to do with some filed subbids that we added, and I'm not going to get into that now. I'm really going to focus just on the 2 most recent change orders that I haven't discussed in prior updates. Similarly, or actually differently, the collection system project started out at $17.541 million and change, and that's now down to $17,498,015. As you can see in the 3rd line down here, we still have a fair amount of contingency. We've started out at 2.5 mil. Now we're down to just under 1.7 million. But I think we're all pretty comfortable that we can live within our means on this. There's been a slight increase in contingency actually since our last update to the board. We've captured about $126,000 in change, largely through a couple of value-oriented change orders. So a little bit more on those. At the treatment plant, since our last update, we've executed change order 3. This changed the way that that pipes go through the walls. We essentially switched from what's called wall pipes, which go all the way through the wall and extend a little further, to wall castings, which can be installed entirely within the formwork. That saved the contractor a bunch of time, but yielded a similar quality product. So we were able to capture a $30,000 plus change order there. So that was a credit to the contract. More recently, we've executed change order 4, which was an additional credit in the amount of $52,303 and change. And that was associated with relocating an entrance gate to the site. We changed a future concrete connection between the SBR tanks that are being built for this project and kind of a mirror image of those tanks that could be built in the future. Changed some flange hardware. This was really just swapping out the material for bolts for some flange connections in the basement. That saved money. And then there was a change of some influent and effluent force main piping from ductile iron to PVC. That was really a change that allowed material at the treatment plant site to match the materials that Robert Auer was using in the collection system. So again, a good capture there. Out in the collection system, we've secured a change order number 2, which yielded an $85,000 credit by kind of simplifying some low pressure sewer manholes. These are clean out structures along the collection system. We executed change order 3, which was pretty short money at about just under $1,700, and added a gate valve on Old Tote Road for some operational flexibility. And then lastly, we've executed change order 4, which added $39,872. And that included an effluent line and gravity sewer interconnection up on Lots Hollow. This will allow operators to drain back water if they got to service the effluent force main. This included a 12-inch insertion valve elsewhere in the system and some island work at West Road and Old Colony. So overall, you know, these have been some pretty good cost control measures. You know, I don't want to reiterate them all, but at the treatment plant, I think we've been able to chase things reasonably aggressively to find cost savings where we could. I don't have the latest detail on it, but police details have also been coming in under what AECOM had estimated. And I'm sure Tom's got that number at the ready if we needed it. Electrical service connections have also come in substantially cheaper than allowances that were provided in the contract. So while we're sitting on that savings, it's something that if it holds, we'll be able to cash in on at the end of the project. And then we're almost to the end. Last slide I got here is dealing with contract operations. I just kind of want to get people attuned to what the schedule is primarily. A draft RFP for this is actually, I should have updated this. It's no longer under review. It's actually out to bid as of yesterday. Bids are going to be opened on August 4th. The evaluation committee intends to review these bids by August 25th. And all of this is in anticipation of a select board warrant article vote on September 8th and a special town meeting to follow in October. This schedule, the whole point of this schedule is that it allows operators to be engaged in the last 6 months or so of construction so that they can get a good sense of equipment startup, and they'll see how the end of the building comes together. So that the people who are going to be running it know where everything is and how it works. So with that, any questions regarding collection system or treatment facility that Tom or I could answer?
I think we're good, Ian. Thank you for that
Okay.
update. And
Excellent.
again, Tom's part might trigger more, but that was very helpful.
Okay, guys. Thank you.
See you.
Can everyone see the presentation and hear me?
Yep.
Good.
Great.
Thank you.
So we'll, again, as Dick said, there may be a little bit of repeat here. I'll try to minimize that because I do have a few slides on the plant, maybe provide a little bit more detail in a couple of places here. But again, I'll talk about 4 items, obviously the downtown area collection system, pump stations, et cetera, the meeting house pond area, which is obviously Article 19. For the next phase of that, we'll talk about a little bit about permeable active barriers and then kind of summarize some of the funding, financing, where we stand. So let's talk about the downtown again. And again, I think everyone's probably pretty familiar with this, and Ian just went over the treatment plant on the left-hand side of the slide. And then down below that is a collection system. And just to get everyone an idea, is we're about 39% complete of installing the total gravity sewer on the system. And I'll say the installation of the deepest pipeline is nearly complete. And the reason why I say nearly, the main line's installed, but they were still finishing up a few services in those areas. But I'll say for the most part, again, we are complete with the deepest part. And as Ian said, Brewster Crossroads is one, and I think everyone was familiar with West Street is the other one. And then I think everyone's familiar with a lot of the communication that's been going on the right-hand side, obviously the public outreach. And I know Ian mentioned Amy and the work she's been doing to keep people informed weekly. Reggie's been working as the ombudsman, fielding questions from property owners, et cetera. And then all of the project team members, we've been meeting weekly with both contractors on Thursdays. Again, public media updates, and then Amy, myself continue to update the website. So there's more information that was just added to that last week relative to Meeting House Pond. We'll add these presentations also on there. And there's also a section in there now for the contract operations RFP that's out to proposal, as Ian just talked about. And then the other one is a financial status, and Ian did a great overview of where we stand, talk about some of the proposed change orders. And yes, there's pluses and minuses, and we continue to track those. Both contractors have been doing great as far as trying to identify items where they can save additional money as we go forward. And we continue to do what we call this monthly budget reviews, looking at all of the costs, all of these change orders and the proposed change orders. And I'll say right now, yes, the project's overall on budget. Ian talked about some of these allowances. And if we took credit for some of them now, like the electrical allowances we had, would probably be closer to $1.9 million in contingency out of the original 2.5. But that's also assuming another myriad of allowances that we're going to use 100%. And a lot of those are towards the end of the project. So, right now we're all pretty comfortable with the numbers where we stand. And the last big one is traffic control. There was $1 million allowance for it. As of just a couple of weeks ago now, I'm projecting that we're probably going to be somewhere around another $150,000 savings in traffic police. It could be more as we go down the road because we're using a lot of traffic police, obviously, for some of these major roadways. And once we get into some of the side streets, we don't anticipate using as heavy amount of traffic control. Just to give everyone a quick overview of where we are with the schedule, back in August of last year is when we did the notice to proceed. Ian talked about the contract operations here in green, that at the special town meeting in October that funding will be hopefully approved. Somewhere around middle of June of 2022 is when the treatment facility will be substantially complete. A few months later is where the substantial completion for the collection system. And then we have what we call this 1-year extended operations period where both the OPM and AECom are available to assist the town and the operators in operating of the facility, looking at, finishing up punch list items, any warranty issues, et cetera. I do have a couple of slides later on some of the schedules that will combine them so you can see how things are overlapping, particularly between SRF, the downtown area, and Meeting House Pond.
Hey, Tom,
Yes,
just
Lynn.
briefly, could you clarify when people will actually begin to use the system?
Okay, yeah. So
On the
obviously the main thing is the substantial completion of the treatment facility. That needs to be up and ready to accept wastewater. The collection system, again, is in what I'll call it in 3 tributary areas or 3 collection areas, and there's a collection area for each of the pumping stations. Again, so pump station 1 tributary area is, again, Old Colony, West Street, Pottis, 6A, et cetera. And that all flows to a pumping station that's located at the intersection of West and Old Colony. So all that pipeline is substantially complete right now. They've been doing some testing and videoing of it. So we would anticipate that once the treatment plant is substantially complete, that we can start to issue through the Board of Water Sewer Commissioners and Board of Health for anyone that's abut that property to be able to start to tie in. So obviously some of the downtown area, et cetera. And the way the project was scheduled out was to do it, the tributary area 1 first, followed by 2, and then 3. So again, 2 is where Snow Library Pump Station will be, and the rest of the downtown businesses. And obviously that would follow up probably more like the spring of 2023. And then ultimately Pump Station 3, which is at the Cranberry Plaza or the Stop and Shop Plaza, would be the last one. So we're hopefully going to be able to phase it and not have everyone at one time being required to hook in.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And again, kind of an overview, left-hand side where the wastewater treatment facility is located, again, where the old Tri-Town septic treatment facility, all the way to the right-hand side is the Pump Station 3 at the Stop and Shop or Cranberry Plaza. Lower right, the Pump Station 2 at Snow Library. Pump Station 1 there again, Old Colony and West. And then lower left is the effluent disposal at Lots Hollow at the water tower. I won't bore everyone with all of these, but this just kind of gives you an overview of the extent of the work, some 32,000 feet of gravity sewer, 11,000 feet of force main, couple thousand feet of low pressure. Again, the piping going under Route 6. It appears that's probably going to occur after Memorial Day of this year. We're in the midst, after Columbus Day of this year. We're in the midst of working out those details with the town and with Mass DOT. Again, 3 pumping stations we just talked about, and then some 3,300 customers, 3,300 parcels and 1,100 customers. And as Ian said, this similar photograph of on the upper right of upper left, of Brewster Crossroads. And yes, that is the deepest manhole that was installed in. There's actually some pipes that are a little bit deeper that were installed at West Street. And then obviously another photograph of Old Tote Road of obviously how extensive some of this work is ongoing. Again, the treatment facility, again, multiple tanks and processes to take the wastewater and treat it to a high level of quality so it's able to go to those 5 wicks that Ian talked about at the aquifer recharge area. And again, some similar photographs on the one on the left-hand side. Route 6 is at the top of the photograph, I guess I'll call it, and 6A is on the bottom side. And again, another just a view of that, of the treatment plant building. Just up into this area here is where what we call the SBRs, or the sequencing back reactors, that will start to be built once they backfill some of this other area and move forward. So that would be one of the other extensive concrete work that we're doing. And again, another similar photograph. Again, I think this just bodes well to what Ian was saying, the progress is really being made, because this one down here is the equipment storage facility with that base slab that's now been placed, and a lot of the concrete masonry unit walls have been going up. And again, as Ian said, in another week or so, that should probably be pretty well completed. So with that, I'll stop in case, let's take them in pieces in case there's any other questions relative to the wastewater treatment facility.
I think we're good.
Okay, great. So let's talk about Meeting House Pond and where things stand. So again, gives an overview of Meeting House Pond. I'll say for the most part, just right down the middle here is all gravity sewer. A lot of these side roadways that drop off towards Meeting House Pond and other areas are all low pressure sewer. Order of magnitude, a little bit, about a 50-50 split with a little bit more for low pressure sewer. We have a single pumping station for this area. Keeping in mind that anyone on low pressure sewer will have their individual pumping units to pump up into that gravity system, but the pumping station is targeted to be on town hall property. We're working with the Conservation Commission to identify the final location based on a discussion that we've had with the DPW about 2 weeks ago. And that flow will then pump school to pond over to Finley and ultimately discharge up into the collection system that's being built for the downtown at the intersection of Lots Hollow Road, and then flow to the treatment plant from there. Again, similar components as the downtown. Again, 16,000 feet of gravity, 20,000, 21,000 feet of low pressure. Again, that single pumping station, 7,500 feet of force main, about 474 users. And as I said, about half of them are going to end up on the low pressure systems. We'll get into a little bit more detail on the next couple of slides of where we stand and how we're trying to minimize the number of low pressure pumps if possible. We're currently in what we call the preliminary design phase, which consists of various components. One is what we call topographic survey to look at the elevations. We're doing that combination of aerial survey, which has occurred. And then we do the ground survey to pick up utility information, sills, other items that you can't get from aerial survey as we go forward. We're in the midst of the tail end, I guess I'll say, of most of the subsurface of the borings. And people have probably noticed a couple of things out there. You'll see these very large white circles that are in place out there with numbers, and those are, we do is in white paint, and we do those as far as identifying where those soil borings are going. And then DigSafe is called, and they come out and mark out utilities locations, whether it's gas, electric, et cetera, or the water department marked out the water lines. So that way we go out there, and it's kind of a two-phase process. We actually, what we do, vacuum excavate the first 5 feet, and then we drill down the rest of the way. So the soil borings are to do a couple of things. One is if they're in paved roadways, we then identify the thickness of the pavement that's out there. And then two, the borings then give us information relative to the types of soils out there, whether there's rock, sand, et cetera, and ultimately groundwater depths if it's encountered. So we're about 160 out of the 180 are complete. There's a few more to do at the pumping station site and some along Route 28 that we're waiting for the final permit from Mass DOT to complete. And then we'll evaluate to make sure we have sufficient information in order to determine whether we need any additional subsurface. So we continue to do those, and we've made good progress. The other one is we've been coordinating now with the Board of Health to obtain records of existing on-site disposal systems. We want to incorporate those into the contract documents. It's all based on existing records that they have. And the intent of that is to identify what we feel is the best location for a service connection on these properties. So it's a similar process that happened for the downtown area. And then that was incorporated in the contract documents, and then through the ombudsman and the Board of Water Sewer Commissioners, we provided that information, I call it little sketches in a letter that went to all property owners in the downtown, so they get a final verification of their location. And obviously some of them changed, and people have gone out and gotten engineering firms to look at their locations to confirm it's the best thing, particularly for, I'll say, some of the larger either businesses or the condo associations. So not as many of those obviously in the Meeting House Pond area, but we're going to follow that same process. And then the last couple of things relative to the preliminary design is what we call this cultural resource evaluation. It's a similar evaluation we did for the downtown. I'll say for the most part, it's really a paper research and a field survey. We do it in accordance with federal and mass historic rules and regulations. And the intent is to identify any potential sensitive areas that have a historical value. And obviously that needs to be protected. Similar to the downtown area, there were some areas that said there could be some highly likelihood of those sensitive areas. So we have a firm that's called PAL, the Public Archaeological Laboratory out of Rhode Island. And when we're in some of these areas, we have an archaeological specialist that's standing by when they're doing the excavations to make sure we don't, if we uncover something, they can stop the work and record it and make a determination if anything else has to happen. So 2-day for the downtown area, haven't found anything as we've gone through it. But again, we'll do the same thing for the Meeting House Pond area. And then on the right-hand side of the slide is the last couple of items here is to update the preliminary system configuration. As part of our original work 4 or 5 years ago, we did some preliminary plan and profiles to identify, how much would be low pressure and how much would be gravity, and how we identify that hybrid system versus other technologies. And so we'll be able to take this information to update those and update the quantities associated with that. And again, this is the intent, is that we find out survey shows that a roadway A could be gravity versus low pressure. Our intent is to do that again to minimize the number of low pressure pumping systems. And then an item that came up a couple of months ago was potentially other areas that could tie into the Meeting House Pond area. So for instance, Tonsett Road is one that's been always targeted for a PRB, or the permanently reactive barrier. One of the items we always talked about was, if it's really close to an existing system, what makes more sense, to tie it in or do with a PRB? And again, so we're looking at those areas. And then the other three part of the Freshwater Ponds Committee is to look at Uncle Harvey's Pond, Crystal Lake, and Pilgrim if they came into the system. So this capacity analysis looks at the sizing of gravity sewers, low pressure and force mains, and the pump station. And we do that by looking at only the Meeting House Pond first. And then if those flows came in as individual items or as a combination, does a pipe need to increase in size in order to accommodate that if it ever gets tied in at some point down the road? That was a very similar exercise that we did for the downtown area, which is why some of the pipelines are much bigger than you would need just for the downtown. West Street is a good example, some of Old Colony, even on Lots Hall Road, that have larger pipes than necessary to handle just the downtown area. And
So Tom, just to clarify, making sure that we're all on the same understanding about this, the idea is these are considerations for sizing, but it has nothing to do with getting too far ahead of ourselves for planning any of this, the actual layout of any of this at this point in time. It's not included. It's just sizing Meeting House Pond in anticipation of maybe further down the road.
That's correct, yeah, Lynn. Yes, if there's no funding or authorization from the select board or town meeting to move forward with putting any sewering outside the geographic area for Meeting House Pond that was identified from the consensus plan from OQUAP.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And then the last item is to update that project cost estimate. As everyone knows, the number right now in the capital plan for Meeting House Pond for construction, which would be in the May of 2022 annual town meeting, is about $32 million. That number was developed based on the bids that came in for the downtown area. And then using that, an average, I'll say, of the first 3 or 4 bidders, and then inflating it to the midpoint of construction for the Meeting House Pond area. And that's how that number's now been updated. So again, this is another chance, once we get some more detailed information and a little more definition, we'll be able to update that number again as we go forward into the final design.
Lynn, I have a question before we move off this chart.
Go ahead, Bob.
Tom, on these 4 capacity analysis topics.
Mhm.
These are optional to the town at this point. They are not part of the mandatory system design that was established and approved back in 2015 or 2016 when this whole project started. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes, this will be able to tell, we'll be able to say, you know, if one of these locations come into the system, we'll be able to give you an order of magnitude to say it's going to increase the cost of the project by X dollars. And the town will have to make that decision to say, yep, we want to go forward with that because we want to keep the flexibility open in the future to include that area or not. But that will have to be a decision made at some point by the town.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Bob. And then, as I mentioned, there's a couple of other these schedules as we go forward. Again, you saw these similar orange ones, which is for the downtown area. But I'll flip through some of the meeting house ponds. So again, at this annual town meeting here, May 22nd, is for the final design funding. There is a slide later on to give you a little bit more detail on that. Ian had talked about it, and you saw this one earlier. Again, the contract operations funding would be at the special town meeting in about the middle of October. Again, May of 22 would be the construction funding I mentioned for the meeting house pond. And then somewhere in the order of magnitude of April-ish of 2023 is when would be out to bid and opening bids for the meeting house pond area. You know, within a couple of months, getting the notice to proceed to move forward with that. And somewhere at September-ish of 2025 is where substantial completion would hit for meeting house pond. I'd also anticipate would probably phase the meeting house pond areas so that, again, we wouldn't have to wait to all of the connections to be done in order to start, or all the pipelines to be done in order for those connections to start to tie into it. And again, one of the last slides you'll see here is one that kind of even incorporates the SRF program and how critical that is to not miss some of those deadlines. And Dick referenced that earlier on in the presentation. So I'll talk a little bit about the town meeting article and the SRF schedule here. So on the left-hand side, again, there is a warrant article for some $658,000 for the final design. And that is to take the preliminary design that we're doing now, again, the survey, borings, et cetera, and then create those contract documents. That is the full plans and specifications that are using and going out to bid. It includes preparing and submitting the permits that have been identified, assisting the town in obtaining easements. There's a fair amount of the roadways that are private roadways, so we need to obtain easements, and that similarly occurred to some of the roadways in the downtown area. And then the other one is the critical one is preparing and submitting the various SRF documents in order to obtain funding for the project. And then some of the key dates on the right-hand side for the SRF, or the State Revolving Fund Schedule, what we call the PEF, or the Project Evaluation Form, is typically, you know, somewhere in the middle to end of August of every year. DEP then will grade that, and the best way to look at the Project Evaluation Form, it really is a grading sheet. You get points for having certain things completed or done. So for instance, since the town has an approved comprehensive wastewater management plan, you know, you get 30 points for that. If there's, and there's other components that come to it. And similar to the downtown area, I would say if you get somewhere close to plus or minus 100 points, you typically have a very, very good chance of getting funded. I think the downtown area ended up with 113 points on that. So that's the intended use plan that the state comes out with. They take all of these evaluations that have come in from the various communities and grade and confirm the grading. They may tweak it, and then based on the amount of money that's available, they rank all of these by, again, their point scores, and then identify which ones have to be, need to be funded. One of the other keys here, and Bob kind of talked about a little bit, was you know, the meeting house pond needs to be sewered. There is no other option of looking at other non-traditional technologies, because 100% of the nitrogen needs to be removed that watershed. So that helps you from the viewpoint of this project evaluation form of getting points. In that May of 2022, the construction funding, the 32 million, once that occurs and hopefully gets approved, the town then submits a certificate of funding into Mass DEP by June of that year. That's confirming the commitment. A few months later, we put together what we call the SRF application. And there's a few other steps in between, but these are the key ones. And ultimately, the SRF approves that application and issues what we call an approval to advertise, and then we go forward with that. And the other one quick note here, just to to highlight here, is after that intended use plan comes out and going forward, the Cape and Islands Water Protection Fund then is required to award grants or review and reward grants within 90 calendar days of that issuance of that intended use plan. So this year, obviously, I'll say they were a little bit behind the game plan just because of how the schedules occurred. So they looked at 2 or 3 different IUPs for the last 3 years and caught up to all of them a couple of weeks ago. And as everyone knows, on April 14th, the town was awarded some $14.9 million of a grant for the downtown area. So we would hopefully and anticipate that a similar grant of some 25% would occur for the Meeting House Pond area.
And Tom, this is just staying on that page. This again is one of those hypercritical situations, and it's one of Alan McLennan's favorite reminders for us that we have to do what we have to do on time, or this gets blown up. So in that Maytown meeting of 2022 is where we town meeting have to approve the funding, or we fall off the rails, the SRF rails, right?
Yeah, that's correct. If you miss one of these deadlines, you don't submit a PEF, or you don't submit the certificate of funding.
It gets lost in the mail or something.
You get lost and you lose a year. There is no forgiving of it or whatever. So for instance, if
No
you
excuse.
don't submit the certificate of funding in June of 22 because town meeting didn't approve it, for instance, it would then go to June of 2023. So it's a whole year of losing time.
So
I'm sorry, go ahead, Alan.
add to that, there's a lot of work going on in Washington now. For the first time in 25 or 30 years, there may be money coming from Washington to help with the construction of sewers. We want to be in a position where we are ready to go. And we have reached out to our congressional delegation, alerting them that Cape Cod is a very important place. And
Okay.
try and put together things down in DC to help us. So there may be another grant opportunity that we want to be ready for. And that's why we want to meet each one of those dates in the state revolving fund schedule. Thank you.
And just to reiterate the importance of this, it's also highly competitive. We're competing with other projects. And if we don't seem as ready or prepared, we miss an opportunity. It's not just time; it's the quantity, it's the volume.
Thank you.
And then the last slide relative to Meeting House Pond is just kind of talk about some of the decisions to be made, and I try to simplify this. So there's really 2 items here. One is for the select board to approve the warrant article for the final design for Meeting House Pond, so it can be printed in the warrant, et cetera. Again, I think everyone's familiar. The warrant was, the article was prepared, submitted from the Board and Water Sewer Commission, tweaked by John Kelly, Mike Ford, et cetera, and is now included in the packet for town meeting. And obviously the Finance Committee will be reviewing and voting on all those articles. So
Well, we supported it unanimously.
oh, good. I did not know that. Thank you very much
Yeah.
for that. So again, and now the select board will do there once they get all of their meetings done, et cetera. And then moving forward again is looking at a year from now is again for the Board and Water Sewer Commission is to review and approve an article for the construction funding. Again, that's at $32 million plus or minus. And then ultimately again to the Finance Committee and the Select Board to move forward
Right.
with that. So I'll hesitate again, Lynn, in case there's any other questions on Meeting House Pond.
Anyone? I think we're good. Thanks.
Great. I'll catch people up on permanently reactive barriers.
And I couldn't get my thing unmuted in time. I do have a quick question for him.
Oh,
Tom, going back to a question Bob Wren asked about the alternate areas that may be considered, is there money in that meeting house design thing to consider implications of those areas? Or are they strictly out in left field and there's nothing involved in them at all?
Yeah, no, there was no money at all in the articles, either the design nor the construction article. Again, the design for this year or the 32 million in a year from now for anything outside the geographic area.
Okay, and one other quick question. You would be looking at what properties would be involved, et cetera, what costs would be involved if you were to undergo that study, but you would also get an idea of the flows that would be generated relative to what capacity the plant could have to absorb more capacity. I assume if those studies were decided to be done, that you would be doing that work also.
That is correct.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So I'll move on to permanently reactive barriers. So we've continued to do work on those behind the scenes. We're getting ready to do a couple of things, and I'll try to summarize those with it. And just a little quick background again of what a permanently reactive barrier is. And here's a good kind of overview, the flow going from left to right in here. And we can, again, nitrate that gets into the groundwater comes from various sources, and obviously one of the sources is on-site systems, but other things such as rain contributes to it, fertilizers, etc. But ultimately that gets into the groundwater. We have a flow going again left to right, and we create what we call this permanently reactive barrier. The two ways of doing it is you can actually put in, like, I'll call it wood chips, etc. And those are typically for much shallower PRBs, or we inject what we call this emulsified vegetable oil for the deeper ones. Both of them work in the same principle of we're creating the atmosphere to do what we call nitrification, denitrification. So both of them create what a carbon source, which is necessary for that to occur, and ultimately that it flows through that barrier and then goes out to the estuaries or the ponds, etc. So that's kind of an overview of what the PRB looks like. Over the last couple of years, we've been doing the pilot study at Eldridge Park. We're in the last couple of sampling modes this year of it, although there was funding that was appropriated at the last special town meeting to do some additional analysis, much more simplified, I guess I'll call it, and specifically looking to see when this emulsified oil expires, I guess I'll call it, it gets used up. And that's a very difficult thing to identify because it will vary site by site based on groundwater flow, amount of nitrogen you're trying to take out, etc. But we want to get an idea of, at least here at Eldridge Parkway, because it has a very high concentration of nitrate in the groundwater upstream of it, and that will give us a good indication of what goes down downstream of it and how long it will last. But we reviewed all of these locations based on a watershed, sub-watershed basis. We developed some screening criteria, did a life cycle cost analysis of comparing these PRBs based on the work on Eldridge Park compared to what we call a traditional system, that is the sewering, pump stations, etc. And then looked at the pros and cons of both of these alternatives, or the non-traditionals versus the traditional systems. We did some optimal dimensions of them, model the groundwater flow to define that what we call that capture zone. We're like 40 feet down the ground. We're about a 30-foot deep PRB. We don't catch all of the nitrogen that goes, that whole water column, I guess I'll call it, but within that sweet spot is what we're aiming for, to remove a significant amount of it. Again, we look at the upgrade and downgrade potential for what we call flux, the amount of nitrogen that's in there, And then we look at the efficiency of the PRBs compared to the traditional ones. So in this case, in Meeting House Pond, we're removing 100% of the nitrogen. And no matter how good a PRB is, we can't guarantee that you would get 100% of the nitrogen out. Excuse me. And that's exactly why we're doing sewering of the Meeting House Pond area. Good. So to give you an overview of some outcomes of it, so we've broken it by the 3 watersheds. Pleasant Bay, we identified some 14 potential viable PRBs. We show that they can remove some 2,100 of nitrogen, but that whole area has a target of some 5,000. We've recommended another 13 to go forward with assessment. North Estuary, 3 viable locations. Those actually remove 866 kilograms a year, which exceeds the target of some 566. And again, we're moving forward with 2 of them. And then Rock Harbor has 1, only gets about half of the targeted nitrogen out. So we're not proposing to go forward with that. We're back in last June-ish, I think it was, in August, we had multiple meetings with Mass DEP to look at PRBs and to see how viable they would be and how they could get permitted. It was a favorable meeting. I would say that the one thing which is very typical is they want us to look at a case-by-case basis. And that's exactly what we're in the midst of now doing. And you'll see a couple of figures here in a second of this next phase of trying to refine some of the information. So again, we've phased it out. You've probably seen it in the capital plan of over the next 12 years or so of starting to say, hey, if we decide to put a PRB in, here's roughly what the cost would be. We've talked about number of monitored wells upstream and downstream. We're trying to locate them in right-of-ways so that they're, we don't have to worry about private properties and backyards, et cetera. Again, adaptive management to make those adjustments. And then on the right-hand side, you just talk about some of that sampling and analysis. The sampling and analysis we're doing at Eldridge Parkway is very extensive, and it was required in order to have enough information to show and prove to Mass DEP that it is a viable solution and it could be utilized as the ultimate alternative to non-traditionals. And ultimately, some of this results we get would run through what we call the updated MEP model that SMAS is doing for Mass DEP after a couple of years. And that model is in the midst of being completed. I think it was supposed to be done this spring. It looks like it's going to be the fall now, but we'll be able to say we can, based on the information, we can get X amount of kilograms of nitrogen out. And if that happens, what results do we get for the water bodies and the estuaries? So the next 2 slides kind of show what we call the group 1 PRBs and the group 2 PRBs. A little bit of a background here. So the green properties are the ones that we say, the orange hash ones, I should say, are the ones that, based on modeling and the depth of the PRB, is where the groundwater would be flowing from. So anyone that would have a septic system, so for instance, in this lot right here, that flow would eventually make it to the PRB. So the PRB is depicted in red line. The blue lines are the ones showing the modeling of where that groundwater is coming from. And then the purple circles or bullseyes you see here, the proposed borings and monitoring wells that we're going to be installing over the next few months at these locations. We're out to proposal to 4 or 5 different boring firms or subsurface firms to get pricing. And we're hopeful that if the pricing is favorable based on town meeting approval that they gave us a year ago, or back in, I guess, October, actually, at the special town meeting, we'll be able to then get into group 2. And again, these 4 here is, as you can see up on the upper right here, Ridgewood, Lakewood, Namquo, and Ridge are the PRBs that we're first targeting. We think those are highly likelihoods that are very feasible. And a similar figure for the next group of PRBs, Briar Springs, North and South Gosnell, and Blossom. So, what are the next steps for the PRBs? Again, I mentioned we're venting these locations. We'll be going out and doing the borings to get the depth of groundwater confirmation, sampling to determine the amount of nitrogen actually in those locations. We'll modify some of the assumptions of what we've done over the last couple of years. May have to tweak the locations of these PRBs, and then we'll be getting the public involved, including the town, and doing some regulatory coordination to determine if it really does make sense to move forward with these. One of the things when we compared these again was doing that life cycle cost analysis I mentioned earlier to determine whether it really makes sense to put a PRB in versus traditional sewering or vice versa. We did that based on a 30, 60, and 100-year life cycle cost analysis. And it varied from PRB to PRB. Some of them showed that it was more cost effective to put a PRB in over the 100 years, and others showed it was better to sewering, and others flip-flop depending on which locations you were looking at. And as I mentioned earlier, over the next 10 years or so is where there'll be funding available from town meeting approval in order to do the field assessment, the preliminary design, the final design, and ultimately implementation of these PRBs. So with that, I'll hesitate again and see if there's any other questions on the PRBs. I know it's a lot of information there, but we continue to move forward with those.
Tom, would you remind us, when your discussions with Mass DEP and so on, where did it end up with regard to the potential for there being SRF funding for PRB strategies?
Yeah, that's a great question, Lynn. Again, if everyone recalls, we've done, we did the pilots testing for aquaculture over at Lonnie's Pond, and DEP basically has indicated it would be very difficult for them to permit that and for SRF funding available for that. And that's partially because of some of the uncertainties or the more risks involved with it. That is, we have X amount of oysters, and next thing you know, you have a hurricane that wipes it out and you've lost your nitrogen removal process. Versus the PRB is a little bit more forgiving from that viewpoint. Obviously, it's in the groundwater. We can monitor it, know what's going on. So even if you have a hurricane or you're a flood, again, the groundwater is the groundwater. And it was all positive as far as from Mass DEP, also from MEPA that we went through when we did the notice of project change for the CWMP. And through that process, they vented it through all the other permitting agencies, and there was no major identifiable showstoppers of why it would not be permitted, and therefore why it wouldn't be eligible for SRF funding.
So it's more on the neutral to positive as opposed to the outright negative.
That is correct.
But who's on first? Who's got the ball?
Right. So right now it's with us. I think, matter of fact, I think a lot of Cape Cod and maybe other throughout New England is looking at these results. And I'll say they're probably waiting for Orleans to be able
to be successful, to be
successful in the first one and get it permitted to go forward.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Lynn, I have a question.
Oh, Tim, go ahead, please.
Yeah, so in thinking about these PRBs, I'm curious as to whether you can, you've discussed the life cycle of them, and you're saying that depending upon how much nitrogen is flowing through these barriers and gets removed or gets tied up in the vegetable oil, they have a certain life. Can they be regenerated? I mean, is this something that you could do, 3, 4, 5 cycles where, you get 3 30-year cycles, or by recharging them? And then sort of a side question is, we worry about things that we're injecting into the groundwater, and this seems like we're really going to be pumping a lot of vegetable oil down there, and is that something that we've really verified shouldn't be of any concern?
Yeah, so 2 things. One is, yes, when the life cycle cost analysis was done, it assumed, based on the work that we did at Eldridge Parkway, that we would regenerate or re-inject the vegetable oil. I think we did it every 15 years. That you would go back and say, okay, here's how much it got used up, because the monitoring wells will be spaced so many feet away from the PRB downstream. And the first one is very close to the PRB, so we can tell whether we call breakthrough. of when we're starting to see nitrogen, and obviously that's an indication that the vegetable oil has been used up. So that's exactly how it was done, to be able to go re-inject that. And that's not as difficult as the initial implementation, because the initial one is other monitoring wells and stuff you're doing, versus this one is all in the roadway or the right of ways, and much more small diameter and relatively quick operation. The second question you had was relative to, obviously, in the vegetable oil being utilized. So one, it's a food grade product. It's something that Mass DEP permits, which is what we've done for the Eldridge Park PRB. We do the emulsification again. It makes it a little sticky, I guess I'll call it, so that it adheres to the sand particles and forms that barrier. And again, the nitrogen attacks the vegetable oil, and that's the carbon source that ultimately gets used up. So there's no negatives that have been identified. Again, the PRB process has been around for 40 years now, mostly used for hazardous waste cleanup sites, and not really documented well for doing nitrogen. So that's why I think everyone's looking at the Orleans to see how it can get permitted and the results.
But it's not moving downstream. It's not like the oil is drifting downstream.
It does not move downstream. When you inject it, it stays within, 3 to 4 feet of where you inject it. And that's part of the reason why the vegetable oil, emulsification was done. Before we did the work at Eldridge Parkway, the supplier, I guess I'll call it, did a lot of work, did some pilot study in the bench scale study. In the laboratory, they took sand from the Cape and ran it through columns and did exactly that to see whether there was any traveling of it downstream from where it was injected. And that was one of the things we talked about to make sure we didn't have that as an issue. And that's the other reason why to have that first monitoring well within about 10 feet of the PRB, we were able to monitor that. And in the Eldridge Parkway now, over the 3.5 years, almost 4 years, there's been no emulsified vegetable oil that's been showed up in those monitoring wells 10 feet downstream of that PRB.
Okay, Tim?
Thank you.
You're welcome. And the last thing I want to talk about is some of the funding and financing, and I think everyone will have seen some of these slides before. And the first few, and I'm not going to go into all these details, but basically it's talk about the sewer assessment bylaw, of how the process is to do the betterments, et cetera. Again, water usage has been updated. We've developed some guidelines. Those draft guidelines are on the web page. We're based on a uniform unit method. One of the things I'll say, we're kind of on a holding pattern with it right now for 2 reasons. One is it doesn't need to be decided now because again, the assessments aren't going to happen for a couple of years. But 2 is a special legislation. The documents have gone into the state, but they have not acted on it yet. And again, sewer calculation, we're going to talk about using a 3-year average of water usage. We're going to base it on units and nothing less than 1. And the assessment is not going to be less than obviously the total cost of the collection and pumping station. Keep in mind that the treatment plant and the effluent or the aquifer disposal is all in the tax rate, and it's the collection system and the pumping station costs that are on the betterments at this point. There was other discussions relative to what to do with undeveloped properties. There's discussion on how to do betterment, the payment options, whether someone pays it all up front or you can actually fund it over a 30-year period. There was also information developed relative to what we call privilege fees for properties not abutting the sewers, and what happens if a property changes their usage from a restaurant to a multifamily house or vice versa. That's in the process. Again, compensatory privilege fees. Property owners are responsible for all their costs to connect on their own private property. That is from the building to the lateral that's being installed. in the downtown area now. As I mentioned, the special legislation has gone in, went back in early February, and is still within the state legislation to review and act upon. And the other one is I guess I'll call it this pie chart. Again, this is the $59 million that was presented at the June of 2020 town meeting that consists of, basically 25% on the tax rate, the assumption of so much from the Cape Cod Islands Clean Water Trust, the current betterment policy, the hotel motel tax and short-term rental. Obviously, as we know, back in, again, middle of April is the Cape Cod Island and Trust did award a grant of 25%. So that number is almost right on the nose what we had projected. And I give kudos to Alan McLennan because he did a lot of this work behind the scenes and looking at these numbers. And I would say that some of these other numbers are very conservative at this point, and that the town continues to get some of the money in from the hotel motel tax and short-term rentals. And we'll continue to track that and accumulate that funding, and ultimately through the enterprise fund in order to help pay for it. Alan also indicated that, that the Biden infrastructure program is working through Washington, and there may be additional funding that will come up to help offset some of these other costs. And so we'll continue to track that and work to continue to get grants as we go forward. People probably remember the grant program is back in the 70s and early 80s or what have you, that when there was a lot of grant money available, that's really all disappeared. So it's really a big kudos to the state. And then, but obviously the Cape and Island and the municipalities down here to create the Cape and Islands Trust Water Protection Fund and then end up with these grants, especially at this percentage. So nowadays that just doesn't happen. The other one that still needs to be discussed here that came up at some of the previous ones is what to do with some of the, what I call the pre-construction funding appropriations, some $7.6 million that had to do with some of the, some of the original design work, the downtown Main Street project that was done as part of the Mass DOT work or what have you. So all of that still has to be decided at some point here. So it's a moving target a little bit right now. I think the planning is showing that there was a lot of thought put into it and it's moving in the right direction, and we continue to hope that will happen. And then there'll be that discussion of how to do betterments for Meeting House Pond or any other areas that may the town may elect to start to tie into it.
Quick question.
Sure, Bob.
Tom, there seems to be an inconsistency between the wedges on the pie chart and the numbers in the table. For example, the current betterment policy says 19.4%, but the $9.4 million is more like 15.8% of the total project cost. Which set of data should we be focusing on?
That's a good pickup, Bob. I'll have to look at that. I thought the pie chart was created based on the numbers you see there, but I'll relook at that with Alan and make the correction. We can get a new table out to everybody.
Okay,
You're welcome.
thank you.
And then similar to decisions to be made or what have you, and this kind of gives you, again, another overview. Would include some of the Meeting House Pond 2. Obviously, the first one, it talks about eventually making a decision on how to recover by betterments, calculating those betterments by the Board of Water Sewer Commissioners, presenting that to the Select Board, getting that approved sewer assessment bylaw and forwarding that to the Select Board, and then ultimately an approval of the contract operations, sewer assessment bylaw, and then Meeting House Pond. What you don't see in here is anything relative to the decision we made on the PRBs. We have a presentation that we're going to be presenting in the next, I'll say, month and a half. I'm waiting for some of this proposals that we have out to verify some of the cost for the drilling of, again, the subsurface and the wells. And once we have that, we'll have a better handle on a schedule and the cost and the extent of the areas we can do. And we'll be presenting that to the Board of Water Sewer Commission and to the planning, to George Meserve And then we can also make sure the finance committee is involved with that, at least to listen to the presentation when that occurs. Eventually, that will then have to also go to the select board as we go forward here. We would anticipate, by the way, that this presentation you just saw is going to be very similar to the presentation that we'll do the select board on May 12th, to leading up to the town meeting and some of their warrant reviews and discussion.
Tom, another question.
Yeah, Bob.
Back to the betterment bylaw that has been distributed to the state. What is the holdup, if anything, at the state level?
It's just the legislation working through their own process. Alan, I don't know if you have anything else on that.
Well, I could add to that, Tom.
Oh, Dick, okay.
On April 13th, we got an update that said it had gone into committee.
Yeah.
Someone who knows how government works better than I do can guess at what that means. But it has been moved from Sarah Peak and Julian Sear into committee. So it is on somewhere on the schedule. It is not, the dates have not changed. There's a way to look it up, but the dates have not changed. So it's when they get to it, Bob.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dick. And as I mentioned, again, the PRB is on here, but we'll update that once we get those pricing in and a schedule, and we'll be able to update a decision to be made relative to PRBs. And the last slide here I just want to do is try to put the overall schedule together and look at some of the stuff we just all talked about here. And it will be very a lot of information here, but I'll try to take it step by step. Again, you've seen some of this information on the previous slides. You get the notice to proceed for the downtown area. We've just talked about the Meeting House Pond design funding here at the the May town meeting. I hounded a little bit, and Dick and Alan both also noted it, and Lynn, relative to meeting these dates. So, and actually, there's a typo there which I'll have to fix. That's supposed to be the SRF PEF that gets done here in August of this year. Ultimately, there's the contract operations at the October special town meeting, the May town meeting of next year for the construction funding. There's substantial completion in middle of June for the treatment facility. Again, there's a certified vote going into the state relative to that funding for construction for the Meeting House Pond. Again, substantial completion for the collection system in September of 2022. There's also in October of 22 would be when the SRF application is then submitted to the state. Preliminary betterment assessments are going to be issued for the downtown area sometime January, February of 2023. Again, hopefully the state approves the SRF applications, gives us the permission or the to advertise, happening in April-ish. A couple months later, the notice to proceed. There's the end of the 1-year extended operations period for the collection system and the treatment facility. We prepare what we call the final project cost summary for that downtown area project. And sometime in January, February of 2025 is where the betterments actually get assessed. So that kind of gives you an overview of, again, how some of these all tied together. I didn't dare add in the PRBs because there's so much information on here now, but it would be a very similar process for the SRF program that you'd submit a PEF in August of that year. You do the certified vote by June of the next year, the application, and then do the implementation as we go forward. So with that, Lynn, that's kind of the summary. I'll again take more questions or get it back to Dick and Alan to see if they want to add anything onto it.
Any more questions, or as Tom suggests, we can go back to Dick and Alan for any further commentary and
I have one question.
Tim, go ahead.
So I'm thinking more about these PRBs and how, I mean, I assume that the reason you're looking at them is because they're cost effective relative to doing sewering. And that's what you're going to determine as part of this process, I assume. Do you have any sense? I mean, are there areas of town that may be permanently in PRB, or are we just going to use PRBs as a temporary path towards sewering the entire town? I mean, is there the potential that they could be overwhelmingly cost effective and be something that we want to continue with going forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things we evaluated was looking at the proximity of these proposed PRBs relative to the downtown area and to the Meeting House Pond area. So for instance, Rock Harbor is a good example, or Tonsett Road are the two that we looked at. And, you know, Rock Harbor, it shows it's much more cost effective to put sewers in than to put a PRB there. And if you look at the proximity of it to the collection system, it makes sense. Tonsett was a very similar evaluation. There's other PRBs that are much further away from the downtown or the Meeting House Pond area, and it absolutely makes sense to look at PRBs for at least definitely the short term, and in some cases probably even a long-term solution, because it's very costly, obviously, to put the pipes in the ground, and obviously that would have to increase the size of the facility. Just to let everybody, I think people have heard this before, is the way that facility has been designed. I'll say you can kind of mirror image it. So you could then increase the capacity from the current construction capacity of 350,000 gallons a day and get that up to 700,000 gallons a day, which gives you the flow that is in the approved CWMP. In the presentation, we'll give, I think you can see some of those flip-flopping of which ones really make sense to do PRBs and which ones make more sense to do traditional sewering. Again, the field evaluation that we're going on over the next couple of months is really going to solidify that based on our assumptions.
Okay, Tim?
Yes.
Okay. Anyone else before we give it back to Dick and Alan? Cool. We can probably take the slides down. We're all still here. Well, I see, there we are. So, Dick and Alan, should we just have, 3 to 7 words about some of those topics we talked about a little earlier about who's on first and who's in charge?
Well, one of the, this is something that we talked about that didn't come up in this meeting, but we have discussed, we have, as you've been, Linda's been at all the meetings, and we've had some requests from different groups in town to do things, and we listened, but we're following a plan. We are executing a plan that the town approved, the town funded. There's lots of years of work that's gone into it. That's what we are executing now. We did a tiny bit of, we're smart, but we're not that stubborn. So we did do a little bit of engineering and manipulating, which is very, very short money, to increase the size of some pipes in case some forward-looking engineering in case those things did come on. It was a little bit of a change in the original plan, but it was short money. I mean, less than down payment on the car, really, a couple $1,000 to get some of this done. Which is boring out some. The funny thing about this is that the bigger pipes cost less money because they're more supply. So it was a little bit of coring pipes to coring manholes to receive more flow if indeed those portions of town were going to come on at a later date. So there's some thinking that went on there. However, we do recommend that the town look seriously at how this whole approved comprehensive wastewater management plan is indeed managed. The select board has their hands full with all the once in a lifetime decisions we have going on now. the charter says that we are planners, builders, and operators as a board. And it's a complex issue that's going to go on in phases and phases and phases. There's lots to decide, and there's lots of different interests. And I think corralling that in some way, shape, or form. In fact, I did recommend it. I have recommended to the Charter Review Committee that something, a board, a committee, a staff, a person be assigned to this. So that is something that we talked about offline, Lynn, and I think that's what you're getting at. So who's doing what to whom is a good question sometimes. We know what we're doing, but we've been asked to do other things that are not within our scope. And it's too big a project to allow, creeping of the scope.
Right. And the other question, just for the benefit of my colleagues, that I had asked about earlier, and we had a little bit of chat about it this afternoon, again, for the benefit of my colleagues. And Mr. Daly is lurking behind his blacked out screen right now, but he might want to come on, join us face to face. I was asking about who owns the sewer operations enterprise fund and who owns sewer operations going forward, and asking about clarity out loud about who will the new sewer operator that's just gone out for bid, who will that organization, who will that consulting firm report to? And the answer to that question is report to DPW, report to Tom Daly. And the enterprise fund, as clarified by Mr. Daly earlier today, was also devised by DPW, by Tom Daly, by John Kelly, working in concert together. And it's not something that's, I'll use the word, owned by the Board of Water and Sewer Commissioners. So it's, and again, it's an accounting, as we know, it's an accounting thing. It's not an operational thing. The enterprise fund is an accounting thing. So we had a discussion earlier today after our afternoon sewer update meeting to get that clarified, at least in my mind. And actually, Mr. Daly made a terrific analogy. It will work very similar to the way the water department budgeting and operation works from a standpoint of who's minding those budgets, who's keeping an eye on those things. So as we know, the water department is a pseudo enterprise fund. So the real sewer operations enterprise fund will work remarkably similarly to the water department. Did I get that right, Mr. Daly?
Couldn't say any better, Lynn. Thank you very much. Nothing to add.
So.
Chicken.
And Dick and Alan, help me out. Is there something more that should be said about that at this juncture without belaboring the point any further?
Not at all.
Okay.
I do an add.
Or did we muddle it for your colleagues from the Board of Water and Sewer Commissioners? Because I don't want to create confusion when there's none deserved.
Nope, I think that we've understood this. I think we understand it. It's us that kind of live it, as we go through it.
Okay.
I do want to add just a couple things. John Meyer has done yeoman's work every day, nearly every day, being on site, being the eyes and ears of the town. Obviously, we know he's an expert with all his experience and done lots of this work, and he's out there every day, keeping an eye on things and reports back the smallest of details, and which is fabulous, and we're all benefiting from that. And likewise, Alan visits the plant a couple times a week, gets us great feedback on that. We're lucky to have them both keeping such an eye on things for us. So I'd like to publicly thank them. And I will always take the opportunity to remark at how wonderfully our police are doing. The cooperation from the police department, working with our contractors and keeping traffic and detours around town, and assisting in the Amy, who's done a great job in the communication, as mentioned earlier, and assisting us in the communication via social media and alerts and things, has just been great. We've actually, we've had, now they take the heat, but we've had more compliments than we've had complaints. which is quite remarkable and something that's going on here. So I just wanted to make sure that I got that up.
The other two is the whole community outreach, the work that Reggie does, my gosh, interfacing with and being the United Nations himself, you know, just keeping all these people calm on every highway and byway in town. And then all the information that's pushed out all the time, weekly at least, by Amy as well. And then Dick, I know you get involved in meet and greet as well on the street with some of the people that are having this construction go past their front doorstep. So all of that's been pretty remarkable.
Yeah, the community has been very, very, very accepting. It's gone surprisingly well. You know, I think as we start, you know, matching up pipes and get the connections, I think, you know, it's going to be a little bit more, you know, there's going to be a little bit of difficulty there. We'll have more questions, but it's gone surprisingly well. Reggie's doing a great job.
Absolutely.
So that's the kudos part.
Right. Well, and kudos, of course, to the work that Amy and Tess do behind the scenes on these meetings, and of course, Mr. Parise, and of course, Ian Catlow as well. So it's really an outstanding project.
And Dick Hartman has done a
Thank you very
fantastic
much.
job. Thank you, Dick.
Yeah. Anything else, or are we? Well, so you've got a meeting with the select board in 2 weeks, so you'll leverage this. You'll leverage the Q&A, and so the other part too. And I'll work with Alan offline, perhaps, to figure out what we can do to help best represent the article at town meeting. Okay, so we can provide support for that when you know, we can stand up and do that. Cool. Anything else? Or if not, then probably Dick, you can, unless somebody has other questions, and then you can adjourn your meeting, and we'll either keep going or whatever.
Okay. Commissioners, any other comments, questions? Okay. Well, Lynn, I want to thank you, and thank you, FinCom, for having us. Appreciate it. And thank AECom for
Well, especially, yeah.
So with that, I'm looking for a motion, please, gentlemen.
So moved.
Second,
Okay, roll call vote. We'll start with Herb Kinney,
Herb Kinney, aye.
Al McLennan. Thank you. John Meyer,
aye, John Meyer.
Bob Rich,
Hi, Bob Rich.
and I, Dick Hartman. Thank you very much. 500. Meeting adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Good
Yeah,
night.
thanks very much.
Thanks,
We'll
Tom.
see you
Thanks,
soon.
Tess. Thanks, Amy.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you all. Have a good night.
Good night. And then we'll have a chat amongst ourselves to figure out how best we proceed, because I know a couple of you have some real challenges to keep going. And I appreciate the fact that you're here at all. If Russ is still at work, Russ has a new job this week. Congratulations on your new job, Russ.
Thank you.
Roger is here under, he's up to here with his academic requirements. And
I'll trade with them.
if we could just do one thing, because what I offered up was that we would basically disband after now with the rest of the agenda, because these two guys are only here to help, well, not only here, but are here to help make a quorum. And so the one thought I had is if we could approve the minutes of the 8th of April, that's the set of minutes where we said we were going to attach the budget review stuff to the back of the minutes. Remember, in that meeting, that's what we said we were going to do. And if we could get that, those budget review minutes posted officially as part of our minutes. And then if need be and so on, we can adjourn and just put the rest of the meeting into next week, because it's, would that be all right?
Move the minutes.
Yeah.
Second.
Thank you, Tim and Russ. Any discussion or questions about the minutes on the 8th? Bless your hearts. Thank you very much. All right, Nick, the minutes of the 8th.
Yes.
Tim,
Aye.
thank you. Russ,
Yes.
thank you. Roger, thank you. Bob,
Abstain, I wasn't there.
okay, thank you. And Lynn, yes. All right, so we're done with that. And then we'll just, next week is the week we have John and Kathy coming to the meeting. And so in the meantime, I'll send out some notes from prior where we've had discussions with them, some reminders about what we've talked to them about, just to help you kind of trigger from before. Hi, Lynn. And then we'll just get readier for next week and add some more of tonight to next week's meeting. So I would entertain a motion to adjourn so that you guys can get back.
So moved. Second.
Okay, Russ and Nick, that was. All right, great. Nick, voting.
Yes.
Tim, please.
Yes.
Sorry. Russ,
Yes.
thank you. Roger,
Yes.
thank you. Bob
Yes.
and Lynn, yes, thank you. And thank you all for coming, and especially those of you who are not yet, are still working and so on. And Bob, thanks for your great questions tonight, and Tim as well for your involvement in this. So,
Lynn, one other comment. I'm going to send you an email regarding the forum that you're going to participate in next week. I've got a few thoughts I'd like to share with you. that
okay,
you can
for the
incorporate.
Monday night, yeah. So if
On the
anybody
enterprise
else
funds,
wants
yes.
to be sure that we get that covered for the enterprise funds, because that was meant to be on our agenda tonight. So, and Bob, you know what, if you'd like, we could talk offline too, voice to
Okay.
voice, if you don't want to take a lot of time in writing an email.
I've already typed them up, so I'll send them to you.
You know what, I have been badgering Alan McLennan to say who is supposed to talk about what for how long, and I still don't have an answer on that. So we don't
Okay.
have guidance on that forum yet. So, okay, everyone.
See you later.
Good night.
Night.
Thank you.